Milton is now back to being a Category 5 hurricane, and a subtle track shift now puts portions of the northwest Bahamas under tropical storm watches. Your forecast across the Caribbean and the Bahamas starts right now.
This is Meteo Mundo.
Hi friends, Rusty back at Meteo Mundo. Good to see you on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope you're doing well. Coming up in this video, Milton back to a Category 5 hurricane. I've got all the newest information. We'll look at the potential track and still the very significant impacts expected for portions of Florida, with now potential impacts for the northwest Bahamas as well. We'll look at some active weather across our area on this Tuesday and of course get into the forecast. As always, I love my Meteo Mundo weather community. Let me know in the comments section below where you're viewing from, what the weather has been like. If you have a specific question about the forecast, you can drop it down there as well. Hopefully this video will answer a lot of those questions. So let's get right into it. Since I last saw you, Milton underwent an eye wall replacement cycle early on Tuesday. It can't stay as a 185-mile-an-hour hurricane for very long, so it did drop in intensity, but it has come out the other side of that ERC extremely impressive, and it's already back to being a Category 5 with winds of 165 miles an hour. That's what it looks like on the satellite imagery on this late Tuesday afternoon. Let me show you what it looks like on the visible satellite imagery as well. Again, the eye has cleared back out. It's about 10 miles wide right now. You just have beautiful outflow on all sides. This is a horrifyingly impressive hurricane again, even after going under that eye wall replacement cycle. This is what it looks like when I throw on the visible and the infrared together. You can see how impressive that storm is. Now again, earlier on this Tuesday, it was weaker. You don't see that really tight eye, but there it comes back on this Tuesday afternoon with a lot of deep convection near that center of circulation. The problem is now Milton continues to be in a very impressive storm as of Tuesday afternoon. So from the 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time advisory for the Hurricane Center, winds are 165 miles an hour. Back to a Cat 5. Pressure has fallen again back to 918 millibars, moving east-northeast at 9. That puts it 480 miles from Tampa, Florida. Here is the forecast track from the Hurricane Center, and we're going to deep dive into this because there has been a slight deviation off towards the south. Couple of notes. We still have a hurricane warning in effect for central and the western northern coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula. All the areas in red for Florida under hurricane warnings. That includes a lot of the west coast and a good chunk of the east coast as well. And new to this are tropical storm watches for portions of the northwest Bahamas, including Grand Bahama, and we'll look at all of that as well. Timing is still about the same, with direct impacts expected for Florida very late Wednesday night and into early on Thursday morning as a major hurricane. And it's still all about how much intensity we can knock off of Milton before it moves into the west coast of Florida. Now, here's the reason why we've had a little bit of a track shift overall with the models to the south, because throughout most of the late morning and early afternoon, Milton was actually moving due east more than anything as it was finishing that eye wall replacement cycle and really attaining that eye. You can see over the last couple of frames of the last hour, it's beginning right down the center line of the new track from the Hurricane Center, but that new track is farther off towards the south. So first of all, let's take a look at the intensity. Again, it's expected to remain a Category 5 through today and overnight. As we get into Wednesday, this is when we cross our fingers for the quote-unquote weakening trend, but it is still forecast to come onshore as a Category 3 with winds of 125 miles an hour. Again, we don't really want to focus on the center line too much because impacts will be expected to be felt very, very far away from the center. But again, as of note, now the center line is back over Sarasota County rather than being right over portions of the Tampa Bay. And you can see that cone of uncertainty is a little bit farther off towards the south as well. Now, the Hurricane Center is talking about what has happened with the track of Milton over the last 6 hours as more of a wobble than anything else. I've mentioned it so many times in our live streams and our videos that hurricanes do not take direct paths. They kind of stair step and they move up and down. And generally speaking, when you average that out, you get a straight line. So we'll see if this is just a subtle shift of a wobble east, or whether that really is more indicative of seeing the fact that this storm might try and get in to Florida a little bit farther south than kind of what the last 48 hours has shown. Certainly the models overall have shown a little bit more of a track shift south. Now, this has always been the trend where when I show you these individual spaghetti plots, they're generally along the center line from the hurricane center or south, right? The hurricane center is taking more of the global averages, if you will, and just saying that basically these individual ones are basically putting the storm slightly too far south, right? We'll see how that plays out, but certainly of note for places like Port Charlotte and the Cape Coral area and back down towards Fort Myers, there is the potential now where we might have more direct impacts. Look, the Tampa Bay area is still under the gun as well, guys. Hurricane Center even notes that there's about a 60-mile average error when we're this far out from landfall. But this has now brought portions of the Northwest Bahamas under tropical storm watches. That would be the Abacos, Grand Bahama, and the Bimini area now under tropical storm watches. And again, what that means is tropical storm conditions are possible in this area. So let's talk about how this is going to be playing out with what we know in the short term. So I'm going to drop off those models. You can see there's a nice burst of convection here. The numbers that you see are wind gusts in miles an hour. It's been a relatively quiet day here in Florida, which is good news as evacuations and preps for the hurricane continue. I'm going to throw on the radar imagery here, take off the satellite data. It's going to start to get wet again in a hurry. We're going to start to see more rain move back into Florida late tonight, and then as we get into overnight to tomorrow morning. But the real bulk of what Milton is going to bring will not be moving into the state until very late on Wednesday or early on Thursday. So hopefully everyone in evacuation zones, not only in the West Coast and East Coast, have already left. But if you do live inland, you still have a little bit of time to prepare. Make sure you get all that done by early on Wednesday morning. And you can see all of the hurricane warnings that are currently in effect. Again, we could take a look at the advisory here from the Hurricane Center, and this would be, of course, the 4 o'clock advisory. I do just want to note here, when I go to the hurricane warnings, that we have both West Coast and East Coast under hurricane warnings. It's from Bonita Beach northward to the Swanee River on the West Coast, and then for the East Coast, it's from the St. Lucie-Martin County line northward to Ponte Vedra Beach. All right, so again, what we're expecting is Milton to stay a hurricane as it crosses the state. Obviously, the highest impacts are going to be felt along the West Coast. And although there's going to be significant wind impacts, it's the water inundation from storm surge and potential flooding that will still have the most significant impacts and the most impacts to life. The storm surge is always, unfortunately, to go along with the river flooding, the number one killer in hurricanes. It's not the wind, it is the water inundation, be it along the coastline or with flooding inland as well. So again, it's going to start to get wet before we actually see the core of Milton come through. But this track shift will bring potentially different areas into play for the core winds and the highest storm surge. When we look overall at the arrival of tropical storm force winds, which will be very widespread, again, Milton, although a smaller hurricane now, as we hope that wind shear begins to weaken the storm with the overall max winds, it's going to broaden those wind fields. So there will be a big, wide swath of tropical storm force winds, which could be expected to move into the West Coast as early as about 8 o'clock on Wednesday. That would include the Florida Keys as well. And then just very late Wednesday night throughout the day on Thursday, those winds will traverse their way west to east and eventually begin to impact the Northwest Bahamas by around daybreak on Thursday morning, and again throughout the afternoon hours as well. So let's talk about how Milton could move, right? And why some of the models are a little bit farther off towards the south. First thing, again, we're looking at the upper level steering winds, which will have a big impact on where Milton eventually travels. Again, Milton can't go due east because it's running into this bigger ridge of high pressure. You can see the clockwise winds around that. On the western side, it kind of slips into central and western Cuba. So Milton's going to have to go around that ridge. It's going to be turned to the north and to the east. The other steering flow is this shortwave trough digging into the southern plains and eventually the Mississippi River Valley as well. Now, this is the European model, the same one I showed yesterday. Couple of notes with this feature. First of all, it's slightly farther west, so it may not have as much influence on Milton. This influence would pull it farther north. This is why the GFS and the European models, when I show you those, have Milton slightly farther to the south, and some of the other consensus models are coming south as well. The other problem with this is that all of this green that you see is the strongest wind shear. Those are the fastest winds at the upper levels that were hopefully going to come behind Milton and begin to rip apart the storm on the back end. They are now displaced on the newest run of the European model farther north and west, and potentially may not have as much of an impact as Milton as what we were hoping for. So there is a possibility that Milton doesn't weaken as much as it could if that wind shear is displaced too far north and west. All right. So the overall net of this being the way it is right now is a potential slightly farther south track, but potentially a stronger Milton coming on shore. We'll see how it bears out, but that's not the best news, to be quite honest, to see what that's doing right now. All right, let's get into the forecast and talk about how this might play out. We'll take a look at a lot of the different models. And again, the center line is important for the storm surge and the highest winds, but we are going to have a big, broad wind field here of tropical storm force and hurricane force winds through a good part of the state. And the weather is really going to go downhill throughout the day on Wednesday and especially overnight into early on Thursday morning. Let's take a look. We'll begin with the GFS model here. I'm going to throw that up. Give me just 1 second to fire it up, but we'll also look at some of the higher res models as well. We'll go through Thursday night, and I'll take off some of this so just to be a little bit easier to see. Now, as I have mentioned in previous videos, when you see this reflectivity from the GFS model, this may not be the most impressive looking hurricane from just the reflectivity point. Again, what we're hoping for is that as Milton tries to get a little bit closer to the west coast of Florida, the shear begins to take over and tries to rip apart the inner part of the storm. So we could even end up having an exposed eye or a very barren area of rain on the southern side of an expanding eye wall field, right? As we start to see that inner core expand and kind of lose its integrity, we should see those winds get pushed out farther and farther. So unfortunately, Milton is forecast to become a very wide storm, very large hurricane as it moves on shore. As a matter of fact, the wind field size compared to what it is right now is actually expected to double. As I mentioned again yesterday, that means on the south side of the storm, we could actually have a dry slot, meaning that we may not have a lot of wind on the southern and southeast sides with all the heaviest rain being on the northern sides, but we could still have some significant winds coming back and being wrapped into the south side of the storm, albeit with not a lot of rain down here as well. So again, it's not extremely impressive looking, but those rainfall totals on the northern side could easily be 5 to 10 inches with some locally higher amounts. When I show you the wind profile out of the GFS, so we'll just switch over to the surface winds, and tell you what, we'll go to, let's do this. Let's look at the gusts, actually. I think they'll be a little bit clearer to see here. You'll notice that the wind profile is going to be a lot more concentric, okay? There's going to be winds of hurricane force wrapped around all 4 quadrants. Again, forecast to come in as a Cat 3 with winds of 125, right? Now, if this goes on this centerline track in Sarasota, that means we try and keep a north wind in Tampa Bay, and that would be significantly better for storm surge there. It would be significantly worse for storm surge in the Charlotte Harbor area. It is very dependent on that, but you can see that even on the southeast side, there's a lot of wind here. Now, the latest run of the GFS is still north of that centerline track. You can still see it moving closer to the I-4 corridor, even back down closer to Orlando. So there still is not a ton of agreement. Helene and Debbie and Francine all had very tight tracks from the Hurricane Center and the consensus models. We have not had that with Milton. There's still a lot more play in this track. And so the bottom line of what I'm saying is I do expect this track to still change in some regard. And it could go farther south. It could slip back farther north as well. But you can clearly see that that wind field is much more prominent on the south side compared to the rain. When we take a look at the winds that you can see here, again, we could still have hurricane force winds trying to move into south central Florida here. Okay, even as we have a storm that's well inland. Near the coastline, again, you're still looking at hurricane force winds easily, probably winds well above 100 miles an hour. The GFS is still a little bit too weak, as it has been compared to most of the consensus models, and I'll show you those coming up. But again, just to show you that we do expect to have some of those winds be strong along the coast. Now for the Bahamas, as we get into late Wednesday night, we'll start to see some tropical storm force winds pick up in the Bimini area, portions of Grand Bahama, Walker's Key, and Abaco, and maybe even see some tropical storm force conditions even brush Andros and New Providence as well. They're not going to be sustained enough, at least what I'm thinking right now, to have tropical storm watches there, but we'll see. It's a possibility for Eleuthera and New Providence and Andros. But again, farther north that you go, obviously the more significant impacts. And then as we get into Thursday, you can see that we could have some winds here in the Walker's Key, Grand Bahama area that are pushing 45, 50 miles an hour, even the north side of Abaco as well. And obviously it's going to get very windy along the east coast of Florida, where we're actually going to have some winds coming back on shore, and there's going to be a storm surge there as well. So now let's look at the individual models. That was the wind and the rain from the GFS. This is the pressure model. Again, your landfall, newest run of the GFS, just south of Tampa Bay, just after midnight on Thursday, okay? This is the European model. It has always been farther south than the GFS. Well, now the GFS has come south to basically begin to agree with the European model. It's slightly south of the GFS, but only by about 10 miles or so right now. Landfall slightly later. This would actually be closer to daybreak on Thursday. Now, generally speaking, if this storm is going to go farther south, it's going to contact land and make landfall a little bit earlier because it's not traversing as much area, right? If it goes farther south and east here, down here, it's going to be moving on shore quicker. So we'll see. It'll be all about the forward speed overall. This is the HAFS A model. This model has actually performed very well with what Milton has been doing in the short term. First of all, again, you can see the winds when I pause this right at the very end, moving on shore of around 110. So it's slightly weaker in the hurricane center as well. The other big thing though is, and I'm going to start this loop one more time, look how small the storm is right here at present time, but how wide the wind field expands by the time we get into Wednesday night. This is what I'm trying to say. The shear helps with the highest maximum winds, but on the flip side of that, it expands both the hurricane force winds and the tropical storm force wind fields to impact more people, right? So unfortunately, this is going to come along with more tree damage and probably more power outages because of this shear expanding those wind fields. It's going to be very, very broad storm as it moves on shore. So while the maximum winds get knocked down, you have an expansive storm coming into the west coast of Florida Wednesday night. HWRF model, it's going to be quick. I apologize for that. It's slightly north, but you can see the expanding wind fields there as well. This one would be just on the northern side of Pinellas County. So it's one of the farther north models at the present time. This is the HMON model. It's basically right into Tampa Bay. You get the idea that these tropical models are subtly different, but man, it makes a big difference for places like Newport Richey and Tampa and St. Pete, and then Bradenton and Sarasota back down to Charlotte Harbor and Fort Myers and Naples. It all makes a big difference with the storm surge because, again, anywhere along and south of that eye is going to have the onshore winds. Anywhere north of that will have more of a northeast wind, and so the wind direction is going against the storm motion and is going to try and keep some of that water offshore. Now, again, a significant storm surge is likely with that, okay? So that's what I'm expecting here over the next 2 to 3 days, all right? So let's break down some of the potential impacts. Again, we've looked at the wind, we've looked at the rain, we've looked at the wind, and we've looked at, potentially how this is gonna play out as far as track. But now let's look at some of the individual higher end potentials for impacts, and we'll start off with the rainfall. This is the GFS model. Now again, with the GFS model being slightly north, the highest rainfall is slightly north as well, but this goes along with the fact that you have the dry slot on the southern side of the storm and the wet weather up north. I believe this is how this is going to play out regardless of the model, meaning that the wet weather is going to be on the north side of the storm, the drier air is going to be on the south side, and there's just a big wind field for everyone. So even in this situation where places like Pasco and Hernando and Sumter and Lake and Orange and Seminole and Volusia counties miss out on the highest winds if it's this far south, still could see some hurricane gusts, by the way, the rainfall could be massive. We're talking about maybe a foot of rain in some areas. So localized flooding is absolutely possible up the I-4 corridor here. Okay, we have to keep an eye on that because there could be a mass amount of water coming in. Same thing for portions of Pinellas and Hillsborough counties as well on the north side. So maybe you miss out on the storm surge and the strongest winds, but this could also come along with a foot of rain in some spots, and that's going to cause its own set of problems. We'll probably take that relative to a 15-foot storm surge, but you get the idea that it's not as if there's not going to be any hazards on the north side of the storm. The rain could be extremely significant here of a southwest to northeast swath as the storm moves through. Even on the south side of the storm, we're still looking at decent rainfall totals, right? Nothing as outrageous, especially farther to the south. Miami-Dade looks pretty good right now. And although we might see some tropical storm force winds in Freeport and Lucaya and Bimini and Abaco, potentially avoiding heavy rain. I do expect overall we'll have more rain than what the GFS is showing you. I'll show you the European model right now, but there certainly is going to be a big disparity. And the European model has that as well. It's not as aggressive with the rain between now and Thursday night as the GFS is, but it certainly still picks up on the fact that the drier air is going to be on the south side of the storm. So the maximum on this map is 14 inches. That is offshore, thankfully, but you're still looking at 6, 7, 8 inches of rain in some spots. And again, for the Bahamas, not as much. A couple of 2, 3 inches here and there for portions of the northwest Bahamas, but nothing we can't handle. More than anything for that tropical storm watch, it would be the fact that we could have some tropical storm force winds moving into the places that I just mentioned. This is still the most troubling graphic, friends. This is the biggest problem with this storm. The winds are going to be a big problem indeed, but if we're looking at the potential for life-threatening conditions, it's the storm surge. Now notice that the Hurricane Center, because of this shift to the south, they're still just calling it a wobble, and they haven't gone as far south as some of the models, but they have pulled higher storm surge totals farther south. Now instead of 5 to 10 in Charlotte Harbor, they're calling for 8 to 12. They have not dropped the Tampa Bay forecast as of yet, and that's simply because we're going to be splitting hairs here. A 10 to 15 mile deviation of this track could have significant impacts to the amount of storm surge we could see, but there is still the possibility of a double-digit storm surge in Tampa, of a double-digit storm surge in the Charlotte Harbor area, all the way down to Bonita Beach. It's 5 to 8 down towards Chokoloskee, 3 to 5 for Flamingo, 1 to 3 for the Florida Keys, 2 to 4 for the dry Tortugas. You go north and you still have a 5 to 10 foot storm surge possible from Anclote River all the way up to Chaskawiska. You've got 2 to 4 for the Nature Coast, including Yankeetown, the Crystal River area. Then 1 to 3 for the Big Bend. Obviously, this has improved a little bit for the Nature Coast in the Big Bend. The interesting thing is the totals are coming back up again as the storm moves east, and on the back end of it, we start to see some onshore winds anywhere from Sebastian Inlet, especially up towards the Florida-Georgia line, and really even into the southern portions of South Carolina, 3 to 5, 2 to 4 foot storm surge. Some of that overwash, beach erosion, dune erosion is possible, and there have been some evacuations ordered for portions of the coastal eastern side of Florida. So it's not just the west coast that could have problems with water inundation from storm surge. Portions of the east coast could as well. These wave heights could be astronomical. Take a look at this, guys. Bottom right hand of your screen is at any point in time the highest wave on this model, over 30-foot waves coming into the east side of the Gulf of Mexico. On the back end of that, you get over 20-foot swells in the western Atlantic. So regardless of whether we see tropical storm conditions in the Bahamas, obviously we're going to have some rough surf and sea conditions here, all right? So keep an eye out for that. We're going to have probably gale warnings in effect, obviously, here. But again, long period swells, exposed waters of the Atlantic, no good to be out. Everyone's going to want to stay in port here until this storm works its way on by. Friends, let's talk about what should be happening right now in Florida. I spent some time today to get prepped. I live inland. I'm not having to worry about evacuating, but there is still the possibility that a lot of central Florida, including myself, could have some hurricane force winds. Hurricane preps should be done along the west coast. Hopefully everyone is done with that. Inland, you still have time to finish by Wednesday morning. If you're in an evacuation zone, you got to get out. Simple as that. Please don't stay. If you live anywhere in Florida and you think you're going to have tropical storm or hurricane force winds, one good piece of advice is just to secure those light objects in the yard or in the patio, right? Those become flying projectiles when the winds pick up 40, 50, especially to 60 and 70-mile-an-hour winds. So just secure those lighter objects and prepare for power outages. Make sure you have several days of food and water supplies. Make sure that you have rations ready to go, because there is the potential that some areas could be without power. And I've heard this from emergency managers, not just for days, but for potentially weeks. That is obviously the highest, if we will, side of things, to lose power for not just a few days, but more than a week. But it's possible. Hopefully that doesn't end up being the case. But there should be a lot of trees down, unfortunately, with what we expect for Milton. Friends, I'm going to take a quick second just to ask you guys to like this video. I appreciate the support here at Meteo Mundo. If you have not subscribed to Meteo Mundo, you want these tropical updates, your daily forecasts across the Caribbean and the Bahamas, please subscribe right now. Thank you for sharing this with your family and friends. Anyone who think could get something out of this. And I appreciate the support via the membership, the super thanks, and the PayPal and the Venmo that you can find in the description below as well. I'm going to take a quick sip of water, so please excuse me. I'm trying to save my voice because we got a lot more to talk about. By the way, in the end of the video, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about how we're going to be covering the storm as Milton gets closer to making landfall. But the first thing I want to do is talk about what's happening across their area on this Thursday. I'm going to take one brief second here. And again, probably while I reset my computer, the easiest thing to tell you is obviously I'll continue to do these video updates here at Meteo Mundo. We'll do some live streams at Central Florida Weather Live, but then Wednesday night, I will be live here at Meteo Mundo. We will cover the landfall of Milton together. So please join me then. We'll talk more about that time frame coming up. So now let's get into what's been happening across our area on this Tuesday. It's been more active weather for our region. We've had more heavy rain over portions of the Lesser Antilles in the Windward Islands. Hey, guess what? We've had another active flood watch here for Barbados. We've had very heavy rain. We've had some stronger winds. Barbados has had some winds of over 30 miles an hour. You can see that there's this nice shear axis. Notice that the clouds on this visible satellite imagery are moving in a couple of different directions. That inherently causes lift in the atmosphere. You get some really localized heavy rain in this kind of environment. And that's exactly what we've seen. Sure, not everyone has gotten it, but certain areas have. If you want to do me a favor and you let me know if you live in this area, you've had some of the heavier rain. We've had some of that for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, portions of Martinique, St. Lucia, a few showers, and maybe even some heavier rain for Trinidad and Tobago for today. Dominica, Guadeloupe, Montserrat, again, passing showers and a few storms. But this has been very turbulent weather as well. There has still been a tornado and waterspout watch for Antigua and Barbuda for today. Very active weather, just kind of really squally. Those SLCs, I call them, some scary looking clouds out there. Again, brisk winds and the opportunity for some rain and a few lightning strikes from Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Bart's, Cebes, St. Eustatius, and Anguilla as well. Notice we have kind of a northeast movement to some of these clouds from northeast to southwest. A few passing showers for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands for today. Getting a little cluster of storms developing on this late Tuesday afternoon on the northwest side of Puerto Rico, Aguadilla, on over towards San Sebastian and Arecibo. Heavy lightning developing with this and some good rain as well. So lightning really getting kicked up there on the northwest side of the island. We've had just a few spotty showers and storms that are trying to become a little bit more prominent right there. Portions of the northeast side of Haiti, the northwest sides of the Dominican Republic. Been relatively quiet on the southern coastline for today. Places like Punta Cana, Santo Domingo as well. My friends in Jamaica, relatively quiet again for today. Again, check things out. Didn't look like you guys had much rain, if any, at all. You might catch a couple of showers later today, but when I show you the water vapor imagery, again, there is some inherently dry air that is snuck back into the northwest side of the Caribbean. So that is a possibility for us here as well. Looks like I've frozen on the camera here. Let me see. Take myself off camera. That's fine. I'm just going to keep myself off camera the rest of the time. No big deal. We'll keep on with the forecast. So you can see that there's been a little bit of drier air here on the northwest side of the Caribbean. So that's really shunted the rain chances for portions of Cuba and the Cayman Islands as well. Not a lot of rain on board over the next day or so. Obviously, we're pulling in a little bit of moisture back into Panama and Costa Rica. And obviously, it's been very wet weather for the northern sides of the Yucatan. There's been some really impressive lightning here in the Cancun area as we've seen Milton work its way to the north and to the east. So let's talk about the rain over the next several days. in our region. So back over to the model. We'll loop that back up for you guys. Give me just 1 second to, we'll go a few days out in time as well. And again, we still do have Leslie out here. I don't want to just, not mention Leslie, but again, Leslie's a fish storm. It is back to being a hurricane right now, basically teetering on hurricane or tropical storm force conditions, but Leslie is a fish storm. There's another area out here with very little interest as it continues to stay well away from any of our area. So over the next several days, I still expect some active showers and storms over the Lesser Antilles in general, especially down to the Windward Islands. We could have some passing heavier rain. Some of that could slip over Nueva Esparta. We'll try and get a few showers, even developing back over the ABC Islands as well. When it's not raining, it's been hot, guys. Watch out for the heat advisory. Feels like temperatures again approaching the lower 40s Celsius. Daytime highs that'll be, low 30s Celsius in a lot of spots. A little bit spottier rain, speaking of spots, for areas north from Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe. Again, Antigua, Barbuda, still the opportunity, though, for some squirrely weather. So mariners, watch out for the waterspout potential, and again, even a tornado threat inland. We're going to continue to see a few showers and storms for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Not extremely expansive, though. Relatively dry. Many dry hours and locations will also be prominent over the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Turks and Caicos, southeast Bahamas. You're just too far south from whatever Milton goes. Again, you're under an area of high pressure, so I'm not expecting there to be a lot of rain the next couple of days. And obviously, the farther north that you go in the Bahamas, the more influence that we could have from Milton. The opportunity to, again, have some squirrely weather here late Wednesday and into Thursday, especially during the day on Thursday from the Abacos, Grand Bahama, Bimini, Walker's Key, but still could see some breezy showers for Nassau, New Providence, and Andros and Eleuthera there. And we'll dry out for the Yucatan and just have some spottier rain over most of Central America as well. Nothing very prominent. Friends, I appreciate you guys. Normally I'd come back on camera, but I'm frozen. So I'll just drop myself back off camera and say thank you for finding us here at Meteo Mundo. You can find us across all social media, TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook. If you want to send me a picture or video, it's mymeteomundo@gmail.com. Once again, we'll continue to provide you updates here. We'll be doing some lives, and also look out for our 24/7 radar to return as well. You can live track Milton yourself here on our Meteo Mundo channel. All right, friends, until I see you again soon, have a great rest of your Tuesday. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon right here at Meteo Mundo.